The parchment lies worn and fragile, its surface marked by strokes of ink that have survived 5 centuries. Upon it, the map of Piri Reis, drawn in 1513, stretches its lines with unnerving precision. Across oceans he had never sailed, along coasts he could not have seen. One detail unsettles most of all: a shoreline that resembles Antarctica, drawn not as we know it, buried under ice, but as it might have been in an earlier age, free of its frozen weight. Who placed those lines there? Who first saw a land at the end of the world, and how did their knowledge pass through time, reaching an Ottoman admiral, assembling fragments from older, vanished charts? Some suggest chance, distortion, the natural errors of old map makers. Others wonder whether a chain of guardians once carried memory across centuries, knights, monks, secret orders, whispering fragments of knowledge too delicate to expose, too precious to discard. In this story we will drift through maps, voyages, lost journals and treaties that sealed a continent into silence, searching not for answers, but for the shape of a riddle. You are listening to Serene Myths, where history's echoes are told slowly, gently. If you wish, you may like or subscribe and perhaps leave a quiet note of when and where you are listening. Now let us step closer to that fragile parchment and the hand of Piri Reis as he draws a coastline that should not exist. The parchment rests in silence, its surface neither smooth nor coarse, but alive with the faint grain of gazelle hide. When light drifts across it, one might almost imagine it breathing, expanding and contracting like the chest of a sleeper. The air around it carries the faint must of leather and dust, warmed by centuries of confinement in the cool stone of Topkapi Palace. And yet, more than any scent, more than the muted creak of its display case, it is the lines upon it that stir unease. Delicate strokes of ink mapping continents, seas and coasts. Familiar? Yes, but with one strand that seems to belong not to our time, not to our record of knowledge. At the very bottom, a strange shoreline curves across the page, like the shadow of something hidden beneath ice, a geography that should not exist. This is the world of Piri Reis, the Ottoman admiral who, in 1513, stitched together a vision of Earth from fragments. He wrote with confidence that he had drawn from many sources, 20 at least, he said, Arab cartographers, Portuguese mariners, perhaps echoes of Greek charts that had survived since the days of Alexander. Most of those sources have disappeared, burned, lost in wars, dissolved in damp cellars. What remains is his single surviving map fragment, drawn on gazelle skin, measured in careful ink, a composite that he claimed faithfully reflected what he had seen. Yet there it is, near the edge, the unsettling curve, a coastline resembling Antarctica, not wrapped in white, but bare, drawn as though it were a temperate shore waiting for the tide. You notice how the ink at that section seems faded, not erased, but softened, so that under slanted light the contour appears blurred, as if surrounded by mist. When the page tilts, one sees a shimmer, as though waves had once lapped there, caught forever in pigment. Sailors of later centuries would say it looked like a mirage on calm seas, an illusion of a land one could approach but never reach. But here, on a 16th century map, the illusion is fixed, carried forward by time, daring the viewer to ask what was known and by whom. Scholars have argued across centuries, was this truly Antarctica, the continent buried under kilometers of ice, its outline revealed as it might have been thousands of years before? Or was it a mistake, a distortion of South America stretched too far eastward, its coast pulled like taffy by the hands of copyists? To some, The simplest explanation suffices: error. To others, error is too thin a cloak for such precision, for the way the shape curves inward like a bay, then stretches outward again in peninsulas uncannily similar to the modern profile of Queen Maud Land. The debate itself becomes part of the fascination, fact and possibility entwined, neither yielding to the other. Piri Reis himself left a note in the margin, written in a steady Ottoman script. He had drawn upon the time of Alexander. The phrase stands out like an anachronism, bridging the gap of nearly 2 millennia, suggesting that fragments from ancient campaigns, perhaps even libraries long gone, had somehow drifted down to him. He was a naval man, a collector of scraps, not a poet. Yet here he allowed myth to breathe through fact, as though aware that he was transcribing a palimpsest of memory older than his own empire. The story of this map is not only one of ink and skin, it is also of silence. Only a third of the original survives. The rest was lost, not in the distant past, but in more recent centuries. Fire, theft, neglect, or deliberate excision, removing precisely the portion that might answer questions too large, too disruptive. The map was shelved in Topkapi, barely remarked upon for generations, then rediscovered in the 20th century like a whisper resurfacing. Piri Reis himself had no chance to defend it. He was executed, but not for forgery. His death came by order of his sultan for disobedience at sea, not for deception on parchment. That alone gives pause. The map was never denounced as false. It simply slipped into the dark, carrying its questions with it. Lean closer, and one can almost hear the faint ring of metal, as if a blade had once trimmed the parchment edges. The steel leaves behind an echo, a whisper carried down the centuries. That whisper folds itself into a larger murmur, the notion that this was not merely an Ottoman curiosity, but part of a deeper chain of memory, guarded, hidden, passed between hands that left no record. Some would say the map is but an accident, a coincidence of lines. Others would insist it is the visible seam of a tapestry we cannot fully see, one thread that proves the existence of an older design. It is tempting to rest with the image of a cartographer hunched under lamplight, copying coastlines he had never seen, relying on travellers' tales and mariners' charts. But as the lamplight flickers across the gazelle hide, the sense lingers that this particular map is more than the sum of its fragments. Why else has it provoked so many voices, from scholars to adventurers, from rational skeptics to dreamers of lost civilizations? Perhaps because it stands at the border of certainty, a document that insists on being read in two ways, as record and as riddle. And so in this opening, the parchment lies before us, its scent of animal hide, its shimmer of faded ink, its edge trimmed by steel. Around it, silence holds court, heavy and patient. The debate is not resolved, nor perhaps can it ever be. For what is drawn, there may indeed be South America pulled awry by careless copying, or it may be a memory of Antarctica before the snows carried through secret channels of knowledge, surviving long enough to be inked upon a map in 1513. The truth lies in the mist between. The lines fade into the distance like a shoreline vanishing into fog, and in that quiet another sound begins, a faint chime, as though a bell were struck far away, the vibration travelling slowly through the air, guiding us deeper. It is a summons not to answers, but to the guardians of memory, to the keepers of knowledge hidden behind walls of stone and ritual. Beyond the parchment, there are cloaked figures, silent oaths, symbols carved into compasses and whispered across generations. The steel that cut the map now rests upon a chest whose hinges creak open, revealing not gold, but memory itself. And thus the story drifts onward from a single gazelle hide map to the long chain of hands that may have carried it forward, guarded in silence, hidden beneath symbols and vows, waiting for the day the bell would sound again. The map lies still, but another layer emerges as if the steel edge of a compass were tapping against glass, summoning a reflection. What if, instead of gazing at it as an artifact from the past, we placed it beside the outlines that science has since uncovered, the hidden bones of continents beneath the ice? Imagine two sheets of glass pressed one upon the other. On one, the wavering coastline drawn by Piri Reis in 1513, curving in uncertain ink. On the other, the profile of bedrock revealed by seismic surveys and satellites in the 20th century. For a moment the lines tremble, misalign, then shift again, settling into an uncanny overlap that seems to breathe with possibility. This is the heart of the first comparison, the first myth against record. Myth, in this case, is not fantasy, but the interpretation offered by those who believe the map records Antarctica before its shroud of ice. They point to the curvature of Queen Maud Land, to the way the shore indents and extends, resembling modern surveys when stripped of the ice sheet. They remind us that official science claims Antarctica has been frozen solid for millions of years, and yet here, on a parchment half a millennium old, an echo of what lies beneath appears. To them, it is evidence of a lost survey, a memory of a time when humankind possessed the means to chart continents with a precision we cannot explain. The record, in turn, offers a soberer voice. Geographers note that the southernmost portion of South America, when copied repeatedly and bent eastward by error, can produce a shape that vaguely mimics Antarctica. Copyists in the 15th and 16th centuries often exaggerated coastlines, stretching them to fill space, curving them unnaturally. A mistake repeated enough times can harden into form. Thus, what looks to some like revelation may, to others, be nothing more than distortion, a mirage of lines. Between these poles, myth and record, stands the parchment itself, mute yet insistent. Its ink was laid down by a man who wrote in his margins that he used 20 sources, including maps from the time of Alexander. That note alone resists easy dismissal. If Piri Reis was copying South America, why would he attach it to such antiquity, to whispers of knowledge older than Rome, older even than the Ottomans who commanded his allegiance? Step closer and you see another detail. Along the left margin, in smaller script, he noted that one source was from the Portuguese, another from the Arabs, and yet another from earlier times. This layering of sources suggests not invention, but compilation. A man collecting shards, aligning them like broken pottery. And sometimes, when shards are forced together, they form shapes that were never meant. But sometimes, by accident or design, they reveal the original vessel more clearly than expected. The steel that taps on the glass echoes again, slow and measured, as if a craftsman were testing the soundness of a blade. The bell follows, distant, vibrating through the mist. The senses play tricks in this half-light. You can almost imagine yourself leaning over a modern table, two maps before you, one inked by a 16th century hand, the other coloured by computer imaging. The overlap flickers, never perfect, yet never completely wrong. The question hangs, coincidence or continuity? To some, the coincidence explanation grows thinner when paired with another observation, the Antarctic Peninsula. On Piri Reis's fragment, a projection juts downward, not unlike the peninsula that stretches towards South America today. It is not exact, No medieval or early modern map is. But it is there, suggestive, enough to spark debate. Scholars who dismiss the resemblance call it pareidolia, our human tendency to see shapes where none were intended, to read signal in noise. But believers insist pareidolia cannot fully account for such alignment, not when placed side by side with modern outlines. Then comes the peculiar note about Alexander. Quirky, almost absurd. Why would an Ottoman admiral in 1513 connect his map to an empire long gone? Was it a flourish, a boast? Or was it the faint memory of a line of transmission, a sense that what he had copied reached back farther than he could name? Ancient historians wrote of campaigns reaching the Indian Ocean, of fleets dispatched into strange seas. None speak of Antarctica. And yet through misinterpretation, miscopying, or perhaps genuine preservation, the suggestion lingers. Debate continues to circle. The skeptical camp argues firmly the ice sheet has covered Antarctica for millions of years. No human civilization could have mapped it. Therefore, the resemblance must be accident. The camp of possibility answers, science itself reveals complexities. Ice cores show shifts, warmer periods. Geological records hint at times when coastal outlines may have been partially visible, less burdened by ice. To them, the idea of an ancient survey is not absurd, but simply uncomfortable, unsettling, because it suggests a chapter of human history we cannot yet place. In the hush between these voices, the parchment remains, a piece of gazelle hide, faintly translucent at its thinnest edges. Its survival is fragile, its ink already fading. When examined under angled light, the coastline gleams like a phantom. If one listens closely enough, the silence around it carries more than absence. It carries the resonance of a riddle that has lasted half a millennium. A bell struck once, still vibrating. Steel, bell, mist, they converge in this moment. The steel taps, the bell hums, the mist curls across the shorelines. To stand before this comparison is to be suspended between two readings, neither fully convincing, both stubborn. In that suspension lies the enchantment. Perhaps the map is error, perhaps it is memory. Either way, it binds us to the act of looking closer, of questioning what we assume is fixed. The ink may be centuries old, but its uncertainty is alive, breathing in the present. The glass sheets slide apart again. The modern map returns to its silence. The Piri Reis parchment remains in its case, yet the resonance of their overlap lingers, a faint shimmer at the edge of vision. We move away, the bell still humming faintly, and in the echo another door opens, toward those who may have guarded such fragments, who clothed their secrets in symbols and oaths, who walked in cloaks and carried swords, not maps. The keepers of memory wait in the next chamber, their torches flickering on stone, their voices bound by silence, their hands upon chests sworn to secrecy. And as the mist folds around us, the steel edge closes the map with a soft click, and the bell fades into a corridor lined with cloaked figures, the guardians of hidden knowledge, waiting beyond the parchment. The parchment fragment rests like a torn wing, incomplete, its edges darkened, its surface scarred by centuries of handling and neglect. When one studies it, the eye cannot help but search for what is absent. 2/3 of the original map are gone, leaving only this portion, recovered by chance in the library of Topkapi Palace in 1929. The silence of the missing sections feels almost louder than the lines that remain, as though the absent parts are speaking through their very absence, whispering of coastlines and names erased. Imagine, for a moment, the full breadth of what once was. An entire world map painted across the soft expanse of gazelle skin. North and South America in their early outlines, Europe and Africa stretching downward, seas marked with notes of wind and tide, creatures swimming at the edges, myths alongside measurement. What we possess is only the lower left fragment, like a dream half-remembered, the rest blurred into shadow. It is this incompleteness that both invites and torments, for perhaps in the missing pieces lay explanations. Perhaps the southern curve was more detailed, or perhaps it was nothing at all. The absence denies us certainty. The material itself carries its own story. Gazelle skin was chosen for its durability, its fine surface smoother than vellum yet pliant, able to take ink with precision. But gazelle hide, like all things organic, decays. It absorbs moisture, it curls, it tears. Some of the damage could be time's ordinary cruelty. And yet there are burn marks along one margin, faint but undeniable. The parchment looks as if it once brushed flame, then was withdrawn. The darkened edge resembles the rim of a page caught in the corner of a fire, extinguished before it spread. Whether this was accident or intent cannot be known. But when one considers the pattern of survival, that precisely the portion with Antarctica-like coastline remains, while the rest is lost, the mind begins to turn toward darker possibilities. Quirky details surface from its history. For centuries, the map lay neglected, folded in a palace library, almost forgotten. Only in 1929, during cataloguing, did scholars stumble upon it. One official record mentions that it had been walled up, hidden behind shelves. Perhaps this was mere storage, or perhaps concealment. The Topkapi Palace was vast, its chambers filled with relics of conquest, scrolls and manuscripts. To hide something that was simple, and to forget it even simpler. Yet one cannot dismiss the irony. A map whose supposed mystery is a missing land was itself hidden, as if mirroring its subject. The fate of Piri Reis himself adds to the sense of erasure. He was not condemned for forgery, nor for falsehood in map-making. His execution in 1553 came from his failure to obey orders during a naval campaign in the Persian Gulf. He was, by all accounts, a competent admiral, but he angered his sultan. His map played no role in his downfall, and thus it survived, untouched by scandal. But silence surrounds its transmission. No record suggests it was widely copied, studied, or celebrated. It seems to have been placed in the vault and left. Why? If it was merely a curiosity, why not display it? If it was ordinary, why not reproduce it? The absence of reaction is as puzzling as the map itself. This leads to the debated point: was the map neglected by chance or suppressed with intention? To believe suppression is to imagine that someone, perhaps in the 16th century, looked at its lines and recognized too much, saw that it hinted at knowledge that should not exist. In such a case, removing or concealing it would serve the purpose of preserving order, of keeping certain questions from rising. To believe mere neglect, one must accept that a fragile parchment simply slipped through the cracks of history like countless other manuscripts. Both explanations remain possible, but the drama lies in the tension between them. Listen closely, and you might almost hear the faint creak of stones sealing a chamber, the dull thud of a wall being closed. Behind that wall, the parchment sleeps. Centuries pass. Dust gathers. The bell tolls outside, marking time. The steel blade that once trimmed its edges lies rusting elsewhere, forgotten. Only the map remains, awaiting rediscovery. That rediscovery itself feels staged, like the opening of a chest in a storybook, Why in 1929, just as the 20th century was accelerating toward modernity, was it found again? Why not earlier, when exploration was at its peak in the age of sail? Why not later, in the digital era? The timing feels uncanny, as though the map surfaced precisely when it was needed to reawaken questions. The surviving portion itself seems to echo the theme of concealment. A third preserved, two-thirds lost. A coastline shown, a continent hidden, a margin note written, a source unnamed, silence surrounding the death of its maker, discovery delayed by centuries, all align into a motif of disappearance. And when motifs repeat, suspicion follows. Perhaps the losses are not natural. Perhaps erasure is a kind of pattern enacted by those unseen. There is also the possibility of selective copying. Piri Reis said he worked from many charts, some ancient, some contemporary. If those sources have since vanished, burned, buried, or deliberately destroyed, then what we have in his map is the last surviving echo. The very fragility of paper and parchment makes this plausible. Wars consume libraries, damp consumes archives, neglect consumes memory. But the romantic imagination lingers on another thought, that someone, somewhere, decided which parts to let live and which to let die. In that choice lies the power of guardianship, whether benevolent or fearful. The bell sounds again far away, softer now. Steel rings once, then quiets. Mist creeps through cracks in stone. The map fragment gleams faintly under a shaft of light, as though signaling. One cannot say what the missing sections contained, but their absence has become part of the riddle. The fragment is not only a record of coasts, it is a record of silence, of absence. To study it is to confront not just what is drawn, but what is withheld. And in that withheld space, imagination takes hold. Some will fill it with the simple truth of loss, others with the suspicion of suppression. But either way, the missing pieces become a kind of canvas upon which stories are painted, of secret guardians, of cloaked figures who carried knowledge, of chains of transmission that bound past to present. That is where the next step in the journey leads, toward those who swore oaths in stone halls, who lit candles over parchment, who perhaps preserved fragments of maps like this one. The fragment points onward into the silence of orders and brotherhoods, where memory was guarded like treasure, and where steel was as sacred as ink. The chest opens with a groan of iron hinges, and from its shadowed interior comes not gold nor silver, but parchment, scrolls, fragments of diagrams inked in secretive hands. The air that escapes carries the scent of wax and dust, mingled with the faint tang of steel polished by ritual care. In imagination, the glow of torches casts long shadows across stone walls. White cloaks with red crosses shimmer faintly, and voices murmur prayers in Latin. The Knights Templar, sworn protectors of pilgrims, but also perhaps guardians of something less visible, knowledge. In this dim chamber of history, they appear not only as warriors, but as librarians, archivists of mysteries too fragile to survive in open daylight. The fact stands clear in the records we do have. The Templars excavated beneath the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. For nearly a decade, they dug under its stones, emerging not with treasures displayed, but with silence. Chroniclers of the time mention little, yet legends abound. Some whisper that they uncovered relics, others that they found documents, scrolls hidden from the fall of Jerusalem centuries before. It is not far-fetched to imagine that maps or fragments of charts might have been among the relics, descriptions of lands to the far south, preserved in the secrecy of ancient libraries. Whether true or not the impression lingers, these knights were not only guardians of roads, but guardians of knowledge. Quirky threads surface in the rituals attributed to them. In certain accounts, initiates were instructed in a lost word, a secret syllable passed from master to novice, never written, only spoken in the hush of candlelight. Some historians dismiss this as later invention, myth layered onto fact. Yet the idea resonates, a word as a vessel of memory, spoken across generations, preserving meaning when parchment could not. Could such words have described directions, bearings, coasts unknown? Could they have been codes for maps folded away, whispered into continuity while documents risked destruction? These are questions that cannot be proved, but they linger like the echo of bells down stone corridors. Debate circles the role of the Templars in this imagined chain of transmission. Were they truly keepers of knowledge from antiquity, or has later romanticism embroidered their history until they became something more than they were? Records of their banking systems, their fortresses, their naval presence are firm, but maps, secret charts, hidden geographies, these belong more to speculation. Some scholars argue that nothing of the sort ever passed through Templar hands, that their archives contained financial ledgers, not lost worlds. Others insist that the absence of direct evidence is itself a clue, that the Order's silence, its sudden rise and brutal fall, its persecution and suppression, all hint at deeper reasons. Why else would a brotherhood of monks and warriors inspire such fear in kings and popes? Steel glints in the torchlight, a sword resting across a chest sealed with wax. The bell of a chapel tolls above, muffled through stone, marking the hour. Mist curls through the cloisters outside, carrying the smell of rain-soaked earth. Inside, one imagines scrolls wrapped in cloth, diagrams marked with triangles and strange inscriptions. One particularly persistent legend speaks of the lost word, not merely as sound, but as geometry, a shape formed by syllables, a triangle pointing south toward ice and silence. Whether this is allegory or instruction, no one can say. But the alignment of such symbols with cartographic fragments invites thought. The quirky detail of a triangular emblem carved on certain stones in Templar chapels adds texture. Some see only ornament. Others interpret alignment, orientation. At Tomar in Portugal, the round church holds windows that frame the sun at specific solstices, hinting at knowledge of celestial order. Did the same minds that aligned windows with stars also preserve coordinates of seas? Such connections are speculative, yet speculation grows precisely where silence leaves gaps. What is not debated is the Templars' role in maritime ventures. They maintained fleets, transported goods, ferried pilgrims, and moved armies across seas. To maintain such fleets, they would have required charts, port-to-land maps, directions across the Mediterranean and beyond. From there, it is but a short, imaginative step to suppose that fragments of older charts could have been integrated, carried in secrecy, stored in archives, and once the order was dissolved, those charts could have passed into other hands, into the Knights of Christ in Portugal, into the early circles of navigators who pushed into the Atlantic, and later perhaps into the folds of Freemasons or Jesuits. The line is uncertain, but the possibility remains. The debated heart of it all is this: are we weaving myth upon the Templars because they embody mystery so well? Or did they truly act as conduits of hidden knowledge? The romantic image of cloaked figures guarding secrets is powerful, but power does not equate to truth. Yet the silence of the archives, the sudden fall of the order, the loss of its records, all provide fertile ground for the belief that something more was guarded. Kings and popes accused them of heresy, of secret rites, of hidden worship. The accusations may have been political weapons, excuses for seizure of wealth, but in the smoke of persecution, one can always smell hints of other fires. The bell tolls again. Steel rings lightly against stone. In the misted cloisters, the sense of guardianship grows. Whether or not the Templars truly held maps of Antarctica, they symbolize the idea of a chain that carries fragments of knowledge across centuries. In that symbolism lies their enduring allure. They are less a single order of knights and more a cipher for the concept of memory guarded by oath and silence. And so the fragment of Piri Reis, centuries later, can be imagined as one piece of that chain. Perhaps it came from such hands, or perhaps it is only connected by our desire to weave threads where none exist. But desire itself shapes history, and the way we interpret the parchment today is already colored by the aura of knights who dug under ancient stones and swore to secrecy. Fact, quirky ritual, debated role. They intertwine like three strands of a rope, strong enough to pull us deeper into the labyrinth. The chest closes softly. The torches gutter low. Mist presses at the windows, silvered by moonlight. Outside, the world waits, but inside, the guardianship of memory remains, quiet and heavy. Cloaked figures withdraw into shadow, carrying their silence with them. Yet the sound of steel against stone and the echo of bells lingers, pointing us further into the heart of the mystery, toward the rituals and symbols, where the direction south, toward the ultimate ice, was hidden not in maps alone, but in geometry, in oaths, in the turning of compasses. The chamber narrows, torches flicker lower, and along the stone walls, shadows fall into shapes that seem less random than they should. Triangles, arcs, lines that meet at angles. One might dismiss them as tricks of the flame, but the mind lingers, searching for meaning. In the quiet, a compass rests on a table of rough wood, its needle quivering. Slowly, steadily, it leans, not toward the familiar north, but straining downward toward an emptiness at the edge of the map. South, always south, toward the white silence where parchment and imagination converge. The Templar rituals were steeped in symbolism, and while much remains veiled by suppression and later invention, enough fragments survive to intrigue. In certain manuscripts, prayers refer to the Ultima Glacies, the last ice, as if invoking a place both physical and metaphorical. Was this a poetic flourish, a way of describing hardship, endurance, purity? Or was it a veiled acknowledgement of lands known but unspoken, of an awareness that something waited beyond the horizon, silent beneath frost? The fact is, the records are ambiguous. They exist, but interpretation divides scholars. Consider the geometry. Triangles abound in Templar architecture, carved into stone, stitched into banners, drawn in margins. The triangle was a holy symbol, yes, of the Trinity, of balance, of strength. But when laid upon a map, a triangle becomes direction. One point facing north, one east, one west. The third inevitably points south. That downward tilt, so easily ignored, acquires meaning when paired with whispers of ice and silence. Quirky stories claim that initiates were instructed to trace such a triangle on sand, then bow their heads toward its southern point. A ritual act, meaningless to outsiders, yet rich with suggestion for those who imagine hidden geographies encoded in gestures. Debate swirls like the mist outside cloisters. To many historians, these claims of secret rituals oriented southward are inventions of later centuries, products of romanticism and conspiracy. They argue that the Templars were practical men concerned with finance, land, and war, not with encoding directions to Antarctica in their rites. Yet others note that symbols, once embedded in ritual, can carry meanings unintended by the many, preserved only by the few. A gesture may serve devotion in public, while in private it carries a map. The tension between faith and geography, between oath and knowledge, lies at the heart of this puzzle. Steel plays its role here too. The compass itself was once new to Europe, arriving through contact with the East. The Templars, stationed at the crossroads of crusade and commerce, would have known of it, handled it. Imagine a knight drawing his blade across parchment, aligning it with the quivering needle, not to north, but to a direction less spoken of. A small ritual, invisible to outsiders, yet a whisper of remembrance. In such moments, memory survives not in documents but in practices. A secret can be held not only in ink, but in the tilt of a head, the angle of a drawn sword, the direction of a whispered prayer. Among the more peculiar relics attributed to the order are maps that contain triangles within their margins, small compass roses whose points are uneven, weighted strangely toward the south. Some dismiss these as drafting errors, others, more conspiratorial, see them as encoded signals. Look here to the lands below. These relics, whether genuine or misattributed, become focal points for imagination. And imagination, once aroused, is difficult to silence, for when steel rings against stone in ritual and bells toll in distant chapels, one cannot help but wonder if those sounds were meant to draw minds toward directions unseen. The quirky note of a vow survives in later retellings, an oath to keep silence before the sea of frost. Though no definitive manuscript records it, the phrase recurs in oral tradition, repeated by chroniclers centuries after the order's fall. Perhaps invention, perhaps memory. Either way, the words carry weight. Silence before frost. It is as though the order acknowledged something that must be kept unspoken, something vast and cold, glimpsed but not shared. A metaphor, perhaps, for humility before God. Or, more daringly, a fragment of testimony that distant coasts had indeed been charted, held in secret, preserved in vow. The debate sharpens here. Critics warn against over-reading, against turning every symbol into code, every ritual into map-making. They remind us that medieval minds were steeped in allegory, that triangles and frost and silence may have been spiritual, not geographical. They caution that we project too much, imposing our own fascination with hidden continents onto rites that served other ends. Yet supporters counter that allegory and geography need not be separate. To medieval thought, the world itself was a reflection of divine order. To encode direction into ritual was not deception, but harmony. The earthly triangle aligned with the heavenly, the southern point aligned with mysteries beneath God's sky. The mist curls heavier now, creeping across the cloister floor, rising to veil the feet of cloaked figures. Bells toll, their sound warped by distance, ringing as though underwater. Steel scrapes softly, a compass needle twitching, a sword turned point downward. In that stillness, the sense of south grows palpable, as though every gesture, every line, every word in the ritual was pointing beyond the known seas toward the silence of the ice. The imagery gathers power, not because we can prove it, but because it lingers, refusing to be dismissed, half fact, half legend, wholly compelling. So the rituals and symbols survive, fragments caught between devotion and geography. Triangles, vows, compasses, whispers of ultima glacies, facts supported by some records, quirky traditions that slip through centuries, debates that refuse resolution. They merge into one stream, flowing into the idea of continuity. That knowledge of lands far to the south may have been preserved, not openly, but in gesture, symbol, oath. Whether true or not, the effect is the same. It binds us to the notion of guardianship, of secrecy carried not only in libraries but in living bodies, in rituals performed beneath stone vaults while bells rang above. The mist thickens, blurring torches into smears of light. Cloaked figures bow their heads, their voices murmuring a vow we cannot hear. Steel glints, then disappears into shadow. The compass needle steadies, pointing downward, steady, insistent. South, always south. And from this chamber of ritual, from this hush of symbols, the narrative carries us further, toward other hands that took up the burden after the Templars fell, toward orders reborn in new forms, Freemasons, Jesuits, navigators of Portugal and Spain, who carried the torch of exploration into the wide Atlantic. The bell tolls once more, fading as the chest is passed on to new keepers of the secret memory. The cloister empties, the last torch gutters low, leaving behind the smell of wax and smoke clinging to stone. Outside, the mist thickens until walls seem to dissolve, and from within that shifting veil, new banners rise. The Templars, broken by king and pope, vanish into the night of history. But their memory does not die. Orders are dissolved, wealth is seized, men are tried and condemned, yet knowledge, if it existed, is not so easily destroyed. It flows like water, finding cracks, seeping into new vessels, new names, new rituals. The chain of transmission bends but does not break. Fact tells us that after the suppression of the Templars in the early 14th century, many of their knights found refuge under other banners. In Portugal, they became the Order of Christ, a reconstituted body sanctioned by papal decree. This order, under the Red Cross now altered but recognizable, would go on to sponsor some of the most important voyages of the Age of Discovery. Prince Henry the Navigator, patron of explorations down the African coast and into the Atlantic, was Grand Master of the Order of Christ. Ships bearing its insignia carried not only men and cargo, but also charts, instruments, and knowledge passed from older times into new endeavors. The continuity is unmistakable from Templars to Knights of Christ, from Crusaders to navigators. The quirky detail emerges in their insignia. On compasses and sails the cross was redrawn, yet in some depictions it tilts by a degree, leaning slightly, subtly, toward the south. Some historians call this coincidence of design, a flourish of artisans. Yet, in the lore of secret traditions, such a tilt is never dismissed as accident. It becomes symbol, suggestion, pointing once more to directions less spoken of. A symbol on cloth could be devotion to Christ, yes, but could it also be orientation, an arrow wrapped in piety? Debate here is lively. Were the Knights of Christ deliberate inheritors of Templar knowledge, guardians of hidden charts, or were they simply a convenient continuation of an order too useful to destroy completely? To some scholars, the continuity of names and symbols proves nothing. To others, the evidence of sponsorship, of maritime focus, of exploration aligned with older legends suggests otherwise. When Portuguese caravels pressed south along Africa, were they driven only by the search for spice and gold? Or did some among them carry fragments of older memory, whispers of lands further still, beyond the horizon, shrouded in ice? Steel scratches softly against parchment as navigators sharpen their compasses. Bells toll in Lisbon, their sound echoing across the Tagus River, sending sailors on their way. Mist rises from the water at dawn as ships unfurl sails bearing the cross of the Order of Christ. To watch them depart is to sense the convergence of faith, ambition, and something more elusive, the possibility that in their holds, hidden among charts and astrolabes, were copies of copies, fragments of maps whispered down from older orders. The Freemasons enter the narrative like a shifting shadow. Centuries after the fall of the Templars, lodges rise across Europe, clothed in ritual and symbol. Their tools are those of stonework, compass, square, plumb line. Yet within their ceremonies, echoes of earlier vows and emblems persist. Quirky marks etched into tracing boards depict compasses opened not northward but angled strangely, as though pointing beyond the known. In whispered lore, some have claimed that the Masonic compass, when aligned with certain symbols, subtly directs attention south toward mysteries unspoken. This may be allegory, it may be coincidence, but imagination fills the gaps. The debated point is whether Freemasonry truly inherited anything from the Templars beyond symbolic lineage. Historians often argue that the connection is tenuous, more romantic myth than fact. Yet within the lodges themselves, stories circulate of descent, of survival, of continuity hidden beneath new names, the rituals of secrecy, of oaths sworn upon steel, of silence before the uninitiated, all echo Templar practices. Whether direct inheritance or deliberate imitation, the effect is the same. The aura of guardianship survives, and with it the suggestion that fragments of knowledge, even maps, could have been preserved within these circles. The Jesuits too emerge in this chain. Founded in the 16th century, they became patrons of knowledge, explorers, astronomers, missionaries. Their libraries swelled with manuscripts gathered from across the world. In South America, in Asia, in Africa, they observed, recorded, mapped. The quirky note here lies in some of their preserved diagrams, globes drawn with southern continents, marked faintly, inaccurately, but suggestively. Did they record hearsay from explorers, or did they draw upon older sources carried quietly through centuries of guardianship? Their own vows of obedience and silence ensured that much remained within cloistered halls, far from public record. Debate follows. To skeptics, the Jesuits were simply diligent scholars collecting knowledge without mystery. To believers, they were yet another vessel in the chain, those who, knowingly or not, safeguarded fragments of a larger story. The truth may lie between practical men preserving manuscripts without fully understanding the weight of what they held. Yet the possibility remains that among their archives, hidden beneath theological treatises, there might lie echoes of coastlines glimpsed long before official discovery. Mist drifts once more, curling around cloisters, harbours and lodges. Bells toll across different lands, steel rings in different hands, knights, masons, priests, all bound by oaths, by rituals, by silence. The continuity may be unprovable, but it is evocative. Knowledge does not need to survive in open display. It can survive in symbols, in geometry, in whispered traditions. A cross tilted, a compass angled, a vow spoken in shadow. These become vessels, carrying memory forward across centuries. And so, from the fall of the Templars, knowledge flows onward to the Order of Christ, fueling exploration, to Freemasons cloaked in geometry and ritual, to Jesuits hidden in libraries of global reach. Whether this flow was deliberate, conscious, guarded, or whether it is only our projection upon the patterns of history remains debated. but the pattern itself persists, as compelling as the fragments of the Piri Reis map. The mist thickens, bells toll fainter, steel rests silent on stone. Yet the sense of continuity, of guardianship, grows stronger. The chest has passed through many hands, but it has not been dropped. From Jerusalem to Lisbon, from lodges to libraries, the fragments survive, veiled, waiting. The sound of pages closing is not an ending, but a breath between. And that breath carries us outward, beyond cloisters and chapels, onto decks of ships creaking with rope and timber, sailing into seas less known, into latitudes where the world itself seems to shift, and where explorers recorded sights they were told to forget. The sea stretches outward, grey and endless, its surface ruffled by winds that cut like blades. Ropes creak, masts groan, and the scent of tar mixes with the sharp salt of the southern latitudes. Mist hangs thick, draped across the horizon like curtains of gauze. Somewhere in that veil, ice waits, vast, immovable, unknown. Upon the deck of the Resolution, Captain James Cook stands with charts in hand, his eyes narrowed against the spray, his mind set on pushing farther south than any before. The year is 1773, and history records that this was the first official crossing of the Antarctic Circle. The fact is plain. Cook sailed farther south than any known navigator, charting seas where maps had been blank, where compasses spun uneasily. He crossed the circle, breaching the invisible line that separates temperate waters from polar silence. Yet despite this milestone, Cook returned with words that seemed almost dismissive. He declared that the southern lands were doomed by nature to perpetual frigidness, of no value, unfit for settlement or commerce, a wasteland of ice. His journals, his official reports, were cool, practical, even scornful. The myth of a great southern continent rich with resources, a terra australis long imagined by geographers, was, to him, a chimera. Antarctica, in his account, was not a treasure, but a void. And yet, quirky details surface from the journals of those who sailed with him. Not Cook's polished reports, but the scattered writings of sailors and officers who glimpsed the edge of something different. Some describe walls of ice rising like quarried stone, vertical cliffs that glimmered with symmetry under the pale sun. Others mention plumes of mist rising as if from vents, columns of vapor in the frozen air. To these men, hardened by seas, such sights were uncanny, unnatural, demanding description even if later ignored. Their words, half lost in scattered accounts, hint at a landscape more complex than Cook's dismissal allowed. Debate arises here, sharp as the crack of ice against hull. Was Cook deliberately downplaying what he saw, seeking to discourage rivals from investing in futile exploration? Or did he genuinely believe the continent worthless, blind to details his men recorded? Some argue that his pragmatism was absolute. A land buried in ice could not support colonies, could not yield crops, could not enrich empire, and therefore was of no use. Others counter that his words served a political purpose, that by declaring Antarctica barren, he closed the door on questions better left unopened, questions that might have arisen from strange cliffs and plumes too odd to explain. Mist thickens around the ship as the Resolution presses forward. Bells toll faintly from within the fog, though no land is near. Steel scrapes as sailors draw knives to cut ice from ropes, their breath frosting in the air. You can almost place yourself among them, boots sliding on wet planks, the sting of salt spray against cheeks, the constant sway of the deck under heavy seas. Ahead lies not coastline, but a wall, endless and white, rising like the edge of the world. To some it was proof enough of Cook's judgment. To others it was proof of a silence, a withholding, a refusal to say more than necessary. Cook's legacy is firm in history. He charted vast portions of the Pacific, corrected maps, disproved myths of fertile southern continents. Yet within that legacy lies the paradox. The man who sailed farther south than any before, who glimpsed the threshold of Antarctica, also became its greatest detractor. His words shaped perceptions for decades, discouraging further attempts to probe those icy latitudes. Officially, Antarctica was dismissed as lifeless. Unofficially, whispers lingered of journals, sightings, anomalies. The contradiction itself fuels curiosity. One quirky note remains from that voyage. A sailor described the ice cliffs as like the walls of a city, but no city made by men. He noted sharp angles, formations that seemed deliberate, before quickly attributing them to tricks of light. Another wrote of seas steaming as if heated from below, a momentary vision of warmth in a world otherwise frozen. These accounts are scattered, fragile, half forgotten, but they cling like frost on rope, resistant to time. Debate continues. Should such accounts be taken seriously, or are they embellishments, exaggerations of weary men confronting alien landscapes? Skeptics remind us that ice itself can form fantastical shapes, that plumes of mist may be ordinary weather, that the human mind, strained by cold and monotony, invents patterns. Believers argue that such oddities are precisely the kind of details suppressed when narratives of useless wastelands were promoted. What better way to discourage interest than to label the land unworthy, to silence its anomalies in the name of practicality? The mist closes tighter, bells toll again, steel rings faint on the deck. Cook stands firm, eyes scanning blank horizons, voice cool, measured. Yet behind him, sailors mutter, their words lost in the creak of timbers, their observations tucked into private notes rather than official logbooks. The sea swallows their testimony, but fragments drift onward, like scraps of parchment from a torn map. The voyage of Cook, then, becomes more than a feat of navigation. It becomes a moment of duality. Official record versus unofficial murmur, dismissal versus fascination, silence versus whisper. The official verdict declared Antarctica barren. The unofficial voices suggested something stranger, something unsaid. Between the two lies a gulf of interpretation as wide as the frozen seas they sailed. And so the ships turned back, their sails cracking in icy winds, their decks groaning under weight of frost. Cook's words echoed across Europe. No continent worth claiming lay in the south. For decades his verdict stood. But beneath that verdict, in the journals of sailors, in rumours passed along docks, in tales whispered over mugs of ale, the anomalies lived on. They became part of a hidden current, a flow of memory that joined earlier fragments, the Piri Reis map, the vows of knights, the symbols of lodges, into a wider river of secrecy. The bell tolls once more, fainter now, its sound sinking into fog. Steel rests on damp wood, glistening with salt. Mist closes around the Resolution until the ship seems to vanish into it, absorbed by the silence of the south. Yet in that silence, echoes remain, carrying us onward toward other voyages, other anomalies, toward islands seen and then unseen, coordinates written and then erased, reports filed and then lost. The sea does not release its secrets easily. It conceals as much as it reveals, and those who dare its edges find themselves guardians of mysteries no less than knights in cloisters. And so the journey continues from Cook's dismissal, and his sailors' whispers into further puzzles of vanished islands and misplaced records where steel compasses tremble, bells toll without towers, a mist conceals truths that flicker only for an instant before fading. The sea rolls under a low ceiling of cloud, its surface shifting between steel grey and black, as though mirroring the sky's own weight. On the deck, the compass needle wavers, straining against cold iron, reluctant to hold still. Charts lie spread across a damp table, their edges curling under the press of spray and wind. A navigator frowns, his quill scratching corrections, erasing one set of coordinates, writing another. Somewhere in the southern latitudes, islands have been seen and then unseen, noted and then erased. Among them, Bouvet Island, an apparition of rock in a sea of fog, stands as one of the strangest. Fact begins with the record of French explorer Jean-Baptiste Charles Bouvet de Lozier, who in 1739 claimed to have sighted an island at latitude 54 degrees south. His ship was battered by storms, his men exhausted, yet he marked the sighting, naming it Cape Circumcision. The name itself carried weight, a ceremonial cutting, a boundary, a threshold. But when later navigators sought the island, it was not where Bouvet had placed it. They searched, scanned horizons, compared notes, but found nothing. Was the island mischarted, misplaced by degrees? Or had it been a mirage, a mountain of ice mistaken for land? Quirky fragments of testimony complicate the tale. Some accounts describe not just a glimpse of land, but details of shape, angular cliffs, and even markings that suggested something carved, not natural. A sailor's journal, rare, fragmentary, mentions edges like walls, lines too straight for mere rock. Whether this was exaggeration, invention, or memory distorted by hardship, we cannot say. Yet the detail lingers, a burr caught in the fabric of history. Later expeditions sought these cliffs and found nothing but empty sea. The coordinates were wrong, the land absent. The mystery grew. The debate becomes a clash of myth and record. On the side of record, miscalculation. Navigation in the 18th century was imperfect. Longitude, in particular, was notoriously difficult before the invention of reliable chronometers. A few degrees error could place an island hundreds of miles off course. Bouvet, it is argued, simply misplotted his position. The land he saw may indeed have been real, but his coordinates betrayed him. Later expeditions, searching in the wrong waters, found nothing. When the true Bouvet Island was fixed by later mapping, it lay far from his charted position. Thus the record explains the mystery. Yet myth persists. Why did Bouvet name it Cape Circumcision as if he sensed significance beyond chance? Why did some accounts emphasize artificial angles, carved edges, structures glimpsed through fog? Why did subsequent journals mention sightings of vapor plumes, columns of mist rising where land should not be? To believers, these are not errors but traces of something suppressed, details too strange for official records, quietly set aside when charts were corrected. Steel scratches against parchment as corrections are made, erasing Bouvet's coordinates, writing new ones. The bell tolls faint in the distance, its sound muffled by fog, as though acknowledging the boundary crossed. Mist thickens, cloaking horizons, hiding what may or may not be there. One can imagine the sailors straining their eyes, the cold burning their cheeks, wondering if they had seen land at all, or if the sea itself had tricked them. Bouvet Island today is real, a remote volcanic speck covered by ice, belonging to Norway. But its position is not where Bouvet first placed it. Between the record of his sighting and the certainty of modern mapping lies a gap filled with confusion, error, and imagination. That gap is fertile soil for myth. Perhaps he saw another island now lost. Perhaps he saw structures of ice mistaken for stone. Or perhaps he saw something meant to remain hidden, glimpsed only once before being erased by the sea and by history. Cape Circumcision itself becomes a symbol. To circumcise is to cut away, to remove. Naming the island thus feels uncanny, almost prophetic. A piece of land cut from maps, excised from record, its coordinates removed like flesh. The very name becomes commentary on its fate. Whether coincidence or subconscious poetry, it deepens the mystery. Debate continues to ripple. To skeptics, Bouvet's error is simple proof of the fallibility of 18th century navigation. To those who follow whispers of hidden knowledge, the error is too neat, too convenient. How often do explorers name an island with such weight only for it to vanish? How often do journals speak of artificial lines only for later copies of those journals to disappear into archives uncatalogued? The line between record and myth blurs until both seem equally plausible. The quirky note of plumes adds to the uncertainty. Several reports from other voyages in southern seas describe columns of vapor rising as though from vents or fissures. Volcanic activity could explain it, yes. Yet, in an age when sailors were more likely to see the supernatural in natural phenomena, such plumes acquired significance. They became signals, beacons, perhaps even warnings. And when combined with sightings of vanished islands, they suggested to some that lands existed which did not wish to be found. The compass needle trembles on the table, steel quivers against glass, bells toll once, then fade. Mist curls around the ship as if swallowing it whole. In that silence, the sense of uncertainty thickens. Were Bouvet and his men merely mistaken? Or did they stumble upon something glimpsed only once, then hidden forever? The record insists on error. The myth insists on meaning. Between them lies the riddle that keeps the memory alive. The island, real in modern terms, is barren, volcanic, hostile. No carved walls, no plumes, no significance beyond its remoteness. And yet, because it was once misplaced, because it was once seen and then unseen, it remains charged with possibility. Cape Circumcision, a name that cuts, a land that vanishes, a story that endures. Steel closes the compass with a soft snap. The bell tolls one last time. Mist thickens until deck and horizon blur together. The ship drifts forward, into seas where journals will speak of sightings later denied, where islands will appear and disappear, where records will be corrected until nothing remains. From Bouvet and Cape Circumcision, the narrative carries us onward, toward journals lost, testimonies erased, and the growing sense that not all absences are accidents. The pages lie scattered across the deck, damp from spray, their ink smudged by salt and wind. A sailor bends to retrieve one, but the gust takes it, lifting it into the air like a bird with torn wings. It flutters for a moment, then vanishes into the grey sea. A journal entry lost, words dissolved into water. This image lingers because it is not only metaphor, but history. Countless logs, notes, and reports from voyages into southern latitudes exist only in fragments, while others are missing entirely. Absence, once again, becomes part of the pattern, as telling as presence. Fact records that expeditions in the 18th and 19th centuries reported oddities at the edges of the Antarctic seas, sightings of cliffs resembling quarried stone, vapor plumes rising from fissures, angular formations glimpsed through fog. Swedish observers British sailors, others whose names are half remembered, they wrote of these sights in logs and letters, and yet many of those records are lost. We know of them only through references, citations in secondary sources, mentions in correspondence. The originals have vanished as if cut from the page of history. Quirky details persist in oral accounts. One tale tells of a Swedish crew who described a monolith of ice and rock, with sides smooth as though carved, standing solitary in the fog. Another sailor, anonymous, reported columns of vapour, white as marble, rising into the still air. These accounts were passed along, repeated in port taverns, perhaps exaggerated, but some found their way into official reports, briefly noted, before disappearing in later editions. It is as if the record itself was revised, smoothed, stripped of its anomalies. Debate arises here, subtle but insistent. Was this simple negligence, the ordinary loss of paper to fire, water and time? Or was it deliberate erasure, the removal of inconvenient testimony that hinted at something beyond the accepted narrative? Skeptics point out that countless journals from the age of sail have been lost. Worms, mildew, war, and disinterest destroyed many archives. Nothing mysterious, they argue, about missing logs. Yet others see a pattern too regular to ignore. The journals that vanish are often those that mention anomalies, those that describe sights not easily explained. Coincidence, perhaps, or perhaps silence enforced. The motif of silence thickens here. Imagine shelves in naval archives, rows upon rows of leather-bound logs. Dust hangs in the air, disturbed only by the turning of pages. One volume ends with the promise of further notes, but the next is gone. Another contains a citation to an appendix describing unusual formations, but the appendix is missing. A reference leads to nothing. Again and again, the trail dissolves into mist. To researchers, this is frustration. To dreamers, it is confirmation. The missing pieces are the most important. Steel scratches faintly as a key turns in a lock, closing a chest of documents. Bells toll in distant harbours, their sound muffled by fog. The mist itself seems complicit, curling between shelves, hiding what should be visible. The atmosphere becomes almost theatrical, as if history itself were staging an act of concealment. The facts of lost journals are undeniable. The quirky details, monoliths, plumes, angular cliffs are tantalizing. The debate over whether loss is natural or deliberate ensures the mystery endures. One particularly haunting story tells of a journal kept by a midshipman, later quoted in a London pamphlet. He described a shoreline of black stone, ridged and cut like masonry, rising sheer from the sea. The pamphlet, printed cheaply, circulated briefly, then disappeared from records. No copy survives today, only references in correspondence between collectors. Was the pamphlet truly destroyed, or did it simply fall into obscurity, forgotten among thousands of tracts? The ambiguity itself sustains the allure. A record half glimpsed, like an island half seen in fog. The debate is not merely academic. It strikes at the question of how knowledge is preserved and how it is erased. If journals vanish by chance, then history is subject to the blind cruelty of time. If journals vanish by intention, then history is shaped by unseen hands, edited like a manuscript, with passages struck out. Which is more unsettling, that we lose truth by accident, or that we lose it by design? The mist swells heavy and low, pressing against the ship's deck. Bells toll faintly as though underwater. Steel rings once, a page torn from a journal, the sound sharp and final. In this atmosphere, the line between presence and absence blurs. What we know is fragmentary. What we suspect grows in the gaps.
Their late arrival is linked
Perhaps
to
the
a
missing
secret
journals
mission
contained
supply
nothing
hidden in the
extraordinary.
Antarctic base.
Perhaps they contained everything. The uncertainty is its own form of testimony. The quirky image of salt stains remains, circles left on paper where drops fell, leaving rings like seals. In some cases, the stains resembled deliberate marks, as though salted water itself had been used to obscure words. Chance, perhaps. But the mind wanders. What if concealment was not only by loss, but by alteration? A sentence blurred, a diagram smeared, an observation rendered unreadable. Absence achieved not by disappearance, but by distortion. The debate lingers. Some claim that tales of missing journals are inflated, romanticized by those who long for mystery. Others insist that too many vanishings converge on the same theme, descriptions of anomalies near the Antarctic seas. If chance alone accounts for loss, it is a cruel and selective chance. If design accounts for it, then we confront the unsettling idea that silence itself has been cultivated, curated, maintained. Steel closes a chest, a bell tolls once more. The mist thickens until only outlines remain, shelves without books, logs without pages, seas without islands. The sound of a page tearing becomes the sound of wind itself, and in that wind lies the memory of words no longer there. Words about cliffs, plumes, monoliths. Words erased, leaving behind only silence and the suspicion that silence has purpose. The journals are gone, but their absence points onward. From lost logs and vanished pamphlets, the story drifts toward newer centuries, where anomalies were not only noted but investigated with force. Fleets dispatched, expeditions mounted, secrets whispered in the language of war. The torch passes from missing words to hidden bases, from lost journals to censored reports. The mist opens slightly, revealing another scene. Snow plains marked by the tread of machines, banners planted in ice, and shadows of men in uniform scanning horizons with instruments not of wood and brass, but of steel and glass. Engines roar against the silence of the southern ice, their sound low and trembling, like iron beasts shuddering in the cold. Snow swirls in the slipstream of propellers, and searchlights cut pale beams across an endless field of white. This is no age of caravels and compasses, but of steel hulls and aircraft, of banners marked with swastikas fluttering in polar winds. In the winter of 1938, the German expedition ship Schwabenland sails toward the Queen Maud land of Antarctica, carrying not only men and provisions, but the ambition of a regime intent on claiming even the most desolate corners of the earth. Fact is clear, the Schwabenland, equipped with Dornier flying boats, launched reconnaissance flights over Antarctica. Crews photographed vast areas, dropping aluminum darts marked with swastikas to assert symbolic possession. They surveyed regions and named them Neuschwabenland, staking a claim for Germany at the edge of the world. Their reports spoke of ice cliffs, glaciers, and mountainous terrain. The photographs remained stark, black and white images of a land few had ever seen. Yet the expedition's records, though partly preserved, are strangely incomplete. Questions linger over what else may have been documented, what was not returned, or what was later concealed. The quirky detail that survives is a small one. The expedition carried supplies stamped with an emblem of an otter, a creature hardly associated with polar regions. Why an otter? Some say it was simply a unit's insignia, whimsical in design. Others speculate it was symbolic, chosen for its association with water, resilience, and elusive presence, an animal that vanishes into rivers as swiftly as mysteries vanish into archives. The emblem endures in photographs, a reminder that even in the most severe environments, human imagination cannot resist symbols. Debate quickly attaches itself to the Schwabenland expedition. To conventional historians, it was straightforward, an exercise in surveying, propaganda, and territorial claim, nothing more. Yet to others, it is the seed of a myth that grew into legend. The existence of Base 211, a supposed subterranean stronghold beneath the Antarctic ice, built or occupied by Nazis, sustained by geothermal warmth, and perhaps connected to technologies beyond their era. No firm evidence has ever confirmed this base, but the absence of evidence has not silenced speculation. Indeed, it has fertilized it. Steel scrapes against steel as machines rumble across snowfields, leaving tracks that vanish quickly under drifting frost. Bells toll faintly from the ship, marking the hours as crews launch flights into the white void. Mist rises from cracks in ice, curling upward in ghostly columns. The men record what they see, but the full record is fragmented. Some reports vanish, others remain locked. The secrecy of the regime itself ensures that later researchers cannot easily discern where fact ends and legend begins. Among the most debated points are the two German U-boats, U-530 and U-977, which surrendered in Argentina after the war, months after Germany's defeat. Their crews offered explanations, delayed voyages, extended patrols, but conspiracy theorists quickly linked them to Antarctica, suggesting they had carried supplies, personnel, or treasures south to a hidden base. In sober history, these are coincidences of surrender, their lateness explained by wandering patrols. In legend, they are shadows pointing toward Base 211, the continuation of Schwabenland's work in secrecy. Quirky stories add color, however implausible. One tale speaks of a warm lake beneath the ice, steam rising in the dead of winter, where German forces established a hidden colony. Another whispers of tunnels carved by geothermal heat, caverns vast enough to hold fleets. These images may be fantasy, but fantasy grows where records are silent. The mixture of fact, photographs, flights, U-boat arrivals, and speculation creates fertile ground for belief. The debate itself has become ritual. On one side, scholars insist the Schwabenland expedition was limited, ordinary, of no consequence beyond propaganda. On the other, believers in hidden knowledge see it as the gateway to mysteries buried beneath ice. The very name Base 211 has become a talisman, repeated in books, whispered in documentaries, invoked in forums. Whether it ever existed is almost beside the point. Its power lies in suggestion, in the silence that allows imagination to flourish. The steel of engines fades, replaced by the ringing of a distant bell, perhaps only the echo of memory. Mist rolls across the frozen plain, erasing tracks as though they had never been made. The Schwabenland sails home, its mission officially complete, its results officially mundane. Yet in its wake lies a trail of whispers, missing reports, symbols stamped with otters, U-boats that arrived too late, stories of warmth beneath ice. The official record explains little. The unofficial murmurs explain too much. Between them, the riddle survives. Even today, when Bouvet Island belongs to Norway and Queen Maud Land is mapped in detail, the shadow of Schwabenland endures. Photographs exist, but gaps remain. Names are written on charts, but stories linger between lines. Steel tools lie rusting in abandoned crates, bells silent in harbours, mist curling eternally over the white horizon. The idea of Base 211 persists not because of proof, but because of absence. Like the missing journals of earlier centuries, silence itself has become the loudest evidence. And so the chapter turns from the age of explorers to the age of armies, from caravels to U-boats, from parchment to aerial photographs. The thread of secrecy runs unbroken, from Piri Reis to Templar vows, from Cook's dismissals to Schwabenland's silence. The chest is never dropped, only passed on, its weight heavy, its contents unseen. The engines fade into mist. Steel rests quiet. The bell tolls once, then falls silent. Ahead lies another expedition, larger, stranger, wrapped in official language yet bristling with rumor. An operation not of one ship, but of fleets, not of survey alone, but of force. The mist parts, revealing helicopters and carriers, the modern world descending upon the Antarctic ice in numbers vast enough to suggest something more than training. And so from Schwabenland and its whispered Base 211, the path leads directly to Operation Highjump, the largest Antarctic mission of its kind, shrouded in its own anomalies. Engines rumble across the Southern Ocean, louder and more insistent than any expedition before. The year is 1946 and the world has only just stepped out of war. Fleets that once bore weapons now bear instruments, though their numbers betray a purpose greater than research. Operation Highjump, commanded by Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd, remains the largest expedition ever sent to Antarctica. 13 ships, over 4,000 men, aircraft, helicopters, tanks, tractors, an armada in all but name. To watch them steam southward is to see not a survey but an invasion of silence, steel descending upon ice. Fact leaves no doubt about the scale. The United States Navy deployed resources unmatched in polar history. The ships bristled with equipment, and aircraft flew reconnaissance missions across the white expanse. Bases were established, training exercises conducted, photographs taken. Yet the mission ended far earlier than planned. Scheduled for months, Operation Highjump concluded within weeks. The official record speaks of harsh conditions, equipment failures, and accidents that claimed lives. But the scale of the force and the abrupt withdrawal left gaps wide enough for questions to seep in. Quirky details emerge from reports at the time. Local newspapers in South America carried stories of Admiral Byrd's statements, translated imperfectly, in which he warned of threats that could reach from pole to pole. The phrasing was vague, open to interpretation. To some, it referred to the growing tensions of the Cold War, to the possibility of Soviet presence. To others, the words hinted at something stranger, objects that could traverse the globe from one pole to another, defying known technology. A mistranslation? Perhaps. But the rumor was born. The debate swirls like mist across the decks of those great ships. Was Operation Highjump merely training, an exercise in cold weather warfare, a demonstration of post-war power? Or was it a mission to investigate something unexpected, something unsettling beneath the ice? Skeptics insist the answer is simple. The Antarctic is brutal, unforgiving, and the Navy underestimated it. Men froze, machines broke, storms battered. Withdrawal was prudence, not mystery. Yet those who peer into the silences see more. Why send so many? Why withdraw so soon? Why speak of threats from pole to pole? The questions unanswered echo louder than the explanations. Steel clangs as cranes lower vehicles onto ice, treads grinding against frozen crust. Bells sound across ships, their tones muffled by snow-laden air. Mist curls low along the decks, veiling men in parkas who move with mechanical efficiency, their breaths clouding in the cold. The visual is overwhelming, the might of modern war descending upon a continent that Cook had dismissed as useless. From parchment to steel armada, the scale of attention has shifted drastically. Something, it seems, demanded notice. Among the quirks is the presence of experimental equipment, helicopters struggling in polar winds, radar systems tested against ice, survival gear pushed beyond its limits. Some accounts speak of sudden malfunctions, aircraft crashing, strange lights glimpsed during flights. Official reports attribute losses to weather and mechanical error. Yet to those who favor legend, the anomalies suggest encounters with forces unacknowledged. One pilot's log, later destroyed, was rumored to mention unidentified lights maneuvering in impossible arcs. Nothing remains of it but whispers. Debate over these incidents intensifies with distance. The official narrative holds firm: weather, error, miscalculation. The unofficial murmurs suggest something else: that Admiral Byrd and his men stumbled upon phenomena they could not explain, whether natural or otherwise, and chose silence. Some suggest the abrupt withdrawal was not retreat but instruction, that they had seen enough, reported enough, and were told to leave. The truth, buried under frost and secrecy, remains unreachable. The soundscape of Operation Highjump is haunting when imagined now. Steel clashing, engines roaring, bells tolling across the frozen expanse, mingling with the constant whisper of wind against hull and wing. Mist rising from fissures, curling through camps. Men scribbling in logs by lantern light, their ink freezing on the page. Some entries preserved, others lost, still others censored. Absence repeats itself here, echoing the missing journals of earlier centuries. This time, however, the absence occurs not by decay but by intention. Classified, restricted, withheld. Silence curated, as if history itself were being edited before it could be written. Quirky anecdotes add human texture. One sailor recalled the way the aurora shimmered above camp, green veils of light folding and unfolding like curtains. Another wrote of sounds, booming cracks within the ice that echoed like cannon fire. To some, these were simply natural phenomena. To others, they were omens, reminders that Antarctica holds more than ice, that it groans and speaks in voices older than men. These details, though small, deepen the atmosphere, turning Operation Highjump from mere expedition into stage play, with steel ships as actors and the continent as silent witness. The debate extends beyond the expedition itself into its legacy. Did Operation Highjump feed directly into the decision to establish the Antarctic Treaty little more than a decade later, locking down the continent in international agreement? Did Byrd's warnings influence policy, shaping how governments approach the icy south? The record is careful, cautious. The myth is bold, sweeping. Between the two, mystery thrives. Mist closes over the fleet as it turns north, engines droning, leaving behind camps and flags swallowed quickly by snow. Steel rests heavy in holds, equipment abandoned, lessons carried home. Bells toll one last time as the ships steam away, their departure as sudden as their arrival. In the silence that follows, the ice seems to breathe again, relieved of intrusion, returning to secrecy. Operation Highjump remains a fulcrum in the story, an unprecedented force assembled, a swift retreat, a legacy clouded by rumor. Fact explains much, but not all. Quirky details color the edges, debated interpretations fill the gaps. The sound of steel and bells and mist echoes still, leading us onward into the next chapter, where words, spoken into microphones, printed in newspapers, and locked in classified files, will fuel myth against record once more. Admiral Byrd's voice, faint across static, will linger as we confront not only what was seen, but what was withheld. The radio crackles, its voice distorted by static, the rhythm of transmission broken by bursts of silence. A microphone rests heavy on its stand, its steel frame vibrating faintly with the hum of current. Papers lie nearby, typed in neat lines, stained by a dark ring where coffee once spilled. A single phrase stands out, recorded in newspapers across South America. Admiral Richard E. Byrd, warning of threats that could reach from pole to pole in an instant. Fact first. Byrd, commander of Operation Highjump, gave interviews to Chilean and Argentine journalists after the mission. He did speak of the strategic importance of Antarctica, noting that in the modern age, new flight technologies meant the polar regions could serve as gateways for military advantage. He cautioned that the United States could not afford to ignore the poles, as they were potential routes for attack. In the context of 1947, amid the birth of the Cold War, his meaning was clear: the Soviet Union, long-range bombers, and the need for vigilance. The record explains his words as military foresight, nothing more, but the quirky detail lies in the phrasing as it appeared in print. In some translations, Byrd was quoted as warning against objects, or threats, that could traverse from pole to pole with extraordinary speed. The ambiguity of language, whether mistranslation, misinterpretation, or sensationalism by local press, opened the door to something larger. A Cold War warning became, in retelling, a statement about machines that surpassed known technology. Later writers seized upon the phrase, embedding it in myth, a U.S. admiral, respected and rational, hinting at phenomena beyond explanation. The debate becomes one of myth against record. On the side of record, Byrd's own official statements, measured, strategic, concerned with aviation and geopolitics. On the side of myth, the translated interviews, the rumor that his words referred to flying objects seen during the operation, craft that darted across skies faster than any propeller-driven plane. Supporters of the myth point to the abrupt withdrawal of Operation Highjump, linking it to these alleged sightings. Skeptics counter that no verifiable log or transcript records such encounters, only newspaper clippings of uncertain fidelity. Steel taps against paper, the sound of a pen pressed against typewritten sheets. Bells tolled distantly in harbours, their echoes distorted by static, as though carried through the radio itself. Mist curls outside the portholes of ships steaming northward, their decks still haunted by the memory of ice cliffs and winds that stripped skin raw. In that mist, the ambiguity of Byrd's words takes shape. Was he warning of Soviet bombers, or of something stranger? The record insists on the former, the myth clings to the latter. Quirky anomalies creep in from declassified files. Decades later, when portions of Operation Highjump's documents were released, researchers noted omissions, pages missing, details redacted, passages abruptly cut off. Some of these are normal in military archives. Secrecy is routine. Yet the blacked-out lines, the gaps where details should be, became fuel for speculation. If nothing unusual occurred, why the heavy censorship? Silence, once again, functions as evidence. The absence of words becomes louder than their presence. The debate expands further. Some claim Byrd's interviews were exaggerated by journalists eager for sensation, turning practical warnings into apocalyptic visions. Others argue that the consistency of certain phrases across multiple outlets suggests a kernel of truth, however distorted. Did Byrd, weary from the expedition, speak loosely, choosing words that carried unintended weight? Or did he attempt to voice an experience that could not be openly detailed, leaving ambiguity to mask what could not be admitted? The image of Byrd himself deepens the mystery. A man of reputation, disciplined, trusted, he was not prone to wild claims. His polar achievements were many: flights over the Arctic, exploration of Antarctica, leadership of massive expeditions. He was respected precisely because he spoke plainly, and yet his name is now entwined with myths of underground bases, flying objects, and lost civilizations. Whether he intended it or not, his authority lent weight to words that could be interpreted in ways he never imagined. Steel resonates again, the microphone vibrating under the pressure of his voice. Bells toll faintly, perhaps imagined, their sound woven into static. Mist drifts across the press room where journalists scribble translations, their pens racing to capture words half understood. A phrase leaps from one language to another, reshaped, then printed, then circulated. By the time it reaches distant readers, it carries meanings bird never confirmed. Myth grows not from invention alone, but from the fertile soil of mistranslation and silence. Quirky inconsistencies add fuel. Two separate transcripts of the same statement, both typed, both preserved in different archives, contain identical misspellings. Such duplication suggests copying from a single flawed source. Was this evidence of deliberate editing, or simply the mundane repetition of human error? For believers, it is a clue of manipulation. For skeptics, proof of nothing more than clerical carelessness. Once more, the debate spirals outward, never resolved. The broader context cannot be ignored. In the years after Operation Highjump, sightings of strange aerial phenomena surged across the world. Reports of disks, lights, and objects moving at impossible speeds filled newspapers. Bird's ambiguous warning, published just before this wave, retroactively became linked to it. His words, stripped from their Cold War context, were reinterpreted through the lens of mystery. Record and myth intertwined until separation became impossible. And so the microphone rests silent, the coffee-stained papers stacked neatly, the static fading into nothing. Bird's words, whether practical or prophetic, remain suspended in ambiguity. The record tells us he warned of Soviet threats, polar vulnerabilities, the strategic importance of the South. The myth tells us he confessed to encounters with technology beyond our own. The truth lies in mist, unreachable, preserved in silence. Steel sets down gently on wood, the bell tolls one final time, and mist thickens across the horizon. From Bird's interviews and the classified files surrounding them, the narrative flows forward into the next great act, the Antarctic Treaty of 1959, where nations agreed not to exploit, not to militarize, not to dig too deeply beneath the ice. A continent sealed by consensus, locked not by nature alone, but by decision. The bells fade, the microphone falls silent, and the mist beckons us onward. The continent lies silent, its expanse stretching white and infinite beneath the turning sky. Snow drifts smooth over ridges, erasing every mark of passage, every footprint of man or machine. Yet beneath this silence another sound lingers, the shuffling of papers, the clatter of pens, the striking of seals upon parchment. In 1959, the Antarctic Treaty was signed, an agreement that would lock the continent under terms unprecedented in the history of international law. While borders elsewhere flared with conflict, Antarctica became a land of consensus, sealed not by ice alone, but by treaty. Fact is clear: 12 nations, including the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, France, and others, agreed to ban military activity, nuclear testing, and territorial claims. Antarctica would be reserved for peaceful purposes, primarily scientific research. This was during the height of the Cold War, when distrust divided nations in nearly every other arena. Yet here, unanimity was achieved with unusual ease. For decades, the treaty has held, expanded by additional signatories, preserving Antarctica as a place beyond politics. But quirky details emerge when one examines the context. Some of the treaty's language is curiously emphatic, forbidding not only weapons but also the exploitation of mineral resources. Why this preemptive restriction in 1959, when mining technologies were insufficient to penetrate the ice and no immediate economic incentive existed? The decision seems anticipatory, as though participants wished to foreclose possibilities not yet feasible. And then there are reports, scattered, whispered, of geothermal anomalies in Queen Maud Land, regions where heat rises unexpectedly from beneath kilometers of ice. Official science explains them as subglacial volcanoes, natural heat vents. Yet the coincidence of such anomalies near regions long tied to rumor invites speculation. Debate thrives here, as it always does when silence and secrecy mingle. On one side, historians and scientists insist the treaty was simply foresight, a safeguard against exploitation and conflict, a triumph of reason during an age of division. On the other, skeptics question why nations so bitterly opposed elsewhere would suddenly agree so fully here. Was it merely pragmatic, or was there something beneath the ice worth concealing, something that demanded silence dressed as peace? Steel scratches across paper as pens sign names, ink soaking into parchment. Bells toll in distant capitals, their chimes muffled by the weight of ceremony. Mist curls over the vast ice, unseen by the diplomats who meet in warm halls far away. Yet the effect is the same. A continent placed under lock, its doors closed by consensus. The imagery of keys and chests returns, knowledge not destroyed but hidden, sealed away with signatures and seals. Quirky scientific reports add texture. In the decades after the treaty, research stations occasionally recorded anomalies, lakes of liquid water deep beneath ice, heated by sources not fully explained, seismic readings that hinted at hollows, caverns beneath glaciers. Lake Vostok, buried miles below, became a symbol of hidden worlds, preserved ecosystems untouched by time. In Queen Maud Land, radar surveys revealed mountains buried under kilometers of ice, their peaks rising like teeth. Natural, yes, but uncanny, as though continents beneath continents waited to be revealed. These details, though rooted in geology, echo the legends of hidden bases, ancient ruins, forbidden knowledge. Debate sharpens when these anomalies are placed beside political silence. If all is natural, why the secrecy? Why the heavy restriction, the careful monitoring of expeditions, the limitations placed on where and how research can occur? Skeptics insist that consensus masks concealment. Supporters of the record counter that such claims underestimate the genuine scientific achievement of the treaty, which preserved a continent from exploitation. Between these poles lies uncertainty, fertile as ever for myth. The motif of silence grows stronger. Imagine a conference hall in Washington, diplomats seated in rows, the air heavy with cigarette smoke, the faint ringing of a bell to call order. They speak, they sign, they seal. Far to the south, mist thickens across glaciers, bells toll from ships anchored in bays, steel instruments probe the ice. Yet none of what lies beneath enters their words. Officially, the treaty is about peace. Unofficially, it feels like a pact of silence. Quirky anecdotes persist in popular retelling. Some claim explorers stumbled upon regions of unexpected warmth, valleys free of ice where moss grew. Others tell of instruments that registered heat signatures inconsistent with geology. These stories, though often unverified, carry symbolic weight. They whisper that Antarctica is not inert, but alive, not barren, but harboring secrets. The treaty, in this view, becomes not a triumph of peace, but an agreement not to disturb, not to reveal, not to dig. The debate extends further into the modern day. Satellite imagery shows anomalies, geometric shapes, shadows that look like structures, patterns in snowfields. Most are explained as natural formations, tricks of light and resolution. Yet each time such an image circulates, the treaty itself seems to cast a longer shadow. Why, ask some, does international cooperation hold so firm here when elsewhere it fails? Why is Antarctica so unique in its consensus, if not because of what lies beneath? Steel pens scratch, bells toll, mist. Images that repeat across centuries now applied to bureaucrats instead of knights, to scientists instead of sailors. Yet the motifs align, the chest remains closed, the map remains partial, the journals remain missing. Now the lock is not stone or iron, but law. Silence is no longer enforced by fire or suppression, but by treaty. The effect is the same. What lies beneath remains untouched, unseen. And so from the Antarctic Treaty of 1959, the narrative moves forward into synthesis. The fragments collected, the Piri Reis map, the vows of knights, the whispers of explorers, the silence of Operation Highjump, the signatures on parchment, converge into a single stream. The ice conceals, but memory persists. The mist thickens, bells toll faintly, steel rests quietly upon paper. The continent lies sealed, its secrets intact, waiting beneath. The fragments lie before us like scattered shards of a broken mirror. Each piece reflects a sliver of truth glinting in the dim light, yet none alone gives the full image. Parchment from the 16th century, vows whispered in cloisters, journals lost at sea, photographs locked in archives, treaties sealed by pens. Across centuries, these pieces seem to align, not perfectly, but enough to suggest a pattern, a chain of secrecy threading through time. To trace it is to walk through mist, listening for bells in the distance, feeling steel cold in the hand, always sensing that something lies just beyond the horizon of certainty. Fact begins with the Piri Reis map, its gazelle skin bearing coastlines that should not be there. We recall his claim that he stitched together charts from 20 sources, many ancient, some already lost in his time. From this fragment emerges the possibility that knowledge of Antarctica existed long before discovery. Then come the Templars excavating beneath Jerusalem, accused of guarding mysteries, their silence more eloquent than words. Their legacy passes into new vessels, the Order of Christ, Freemasons, Jesuits, navigators whose sails bore crosses that leaned subtly south. Each step is documented, yet each step is incomplete, leaving just enough room for speculation. Quirky details add flavor to the chain. The triangular symbols carved into chapels, the whispered lost word, the tilted compass rose, the sailor's description of cliffs like walls of a city. Each detail may be coincidence, misremembered, or misinterpreted. Yet when gathered together, they echo like a refrain, recurring across centuries in different voices. A phrase whispered in ritual mirrors, a journal's note of frost. A sailor's sketch resembles a symbol in stone. Coincidence alone feels insufficient to explain the resonance. The debate sharpens at this point. Are we seeing continuity, or are we weaving one from fragments that were never connected? Skeptics argue that human minds crave patterns, that we impose meaning on scattered data. The Piri Reis map, they say, misidentified South America. The Templars, practical men of finance and war, cared little for polar mysteries. Cook, pragmatic, dismissed Antarctica as useless. Schwabenland, routine propaganda. The Antarctic Treaty, foresight, and nothing more. These, they insist, are isolated facts, not linked threads. But for others, the very repetition of absence, maps missing, journals lost, files redacted, constitutes a pattern. Silence is not random, it is curated. Whenever the narrative approaches Antarctica, the record grows thin, gaps widen, anomalies vanish. To believers, this is the fingerprint of guardianship, the chest passed from hand to hand, never opened fully, its contents glimpsed only in fragments. The continuity is not in the documents themselves, but in their disappearance. Steel glints faintly as the chest is passed once more. Bells toll in distant cloisters, their echoes carried across centuries. Mist curls through libraries, vaults, archives, obscuring shelves where records should stand. Each fragment, fragile in itself, becomes weighty when joined to others. The effect is cumulative, persuasive not by proof but by resonance. Like a melody played on different instruments across time, the theme of concealment persists. One quirky alignment stands out, the timeline itself. From 1513, the Piri Reis map, to the 1300s, the Templars' dissolution, to 1773, Cook's southern voyage, to 1739, Bouvet's misplaced island, to 1938, Schwabenland, to 1946, Highjump, to 1959, the Antarctic Treaty. Out of order, scattered, yet when arranged upon a single axis, they form a sequence like stars in a constellation. None proves the existence of hidden knowledge, yet together they shape an image. The mind draws lines between them as ancient stargazers drew beasts and gods from random points of light. Debate, however, cautions us. Constellations are illusions of perspective, patterns imposed on stars that lie vast distances apart. Perhaps our chain of secrecy is the same, fragments unconnected, arranged by imagination into a thread. Yet even if so, the effect is real. Constellations guided sailors across oceans, no less effective for their illusory nature. Perhaps the chain of secrecy functions likewise, not as literal truth, but as guiding myth, leading inquiry into corners where silence otherwise reigns. The mist thickens, enveloping the fragments until only their glimmers remain. Steel closes the chest, bells toll faintly, the sound softened by distance. In this half-light, the synthesis feels less like an argument and more like a mood, a recognition of continuity that resists dismissal. Whether by design or by accident, Antarctica has been bound to mystery across centuries. The fragments demand assembly even if the assembly is imperfect. Quirky stories that persist beyond fact amplify this mood. A Nazi emblem of an otter, a sailor's pamphlet mentioning masonry cliffs, a misprinted transcript of birds' words. These minor details, trivial alone, become luminous when gathered. They are like sparks drifting from a fire, quickly extinguished unless collected into memory. Their survival, even as rumor, suggests that silence never wholly succeeds. The debate will never end, nor should it. Mystery thrives in uncertainty, nourished by the refusal of clarity. The record will always insist upon pragmatism, maps misread, voyages miscalculated, treaties foresighted. The myth will always insist upon guardianship, chests hidden, journals excised, bases concealed. The synthesis lies not in choosing one side, but in recognizing that both operate together, entwined like mist and steel, bells and silence. The allure is precisely in the tension, and so the chain stretches forward, unbroken. From gazelle skin parchment to modern satellites, from knights in cloisters to scientists in stations, from ships of wood to fleets of steel, the fragments endure. Each age passes the chest to the next, each adding its own layer of silence, its own peculiar quirks. The continuity is less about what is known than about what is withheld. That withholding becomes tradition, as much a part of Antarctica's history as glaciers and storms. The bells toll once more, deep and resonant, vibrating through stone and ice alike. Steel rests heavy, the chest unopened. Mist closes in, concealing all but the faintest glimmers of fragments. From synthesis, we turn toward something deeper still, the question of interpretation. Not only what fragments exist, but how they are weighed, how they are contested, how myth and record confront each other openly. From this confrontation will come the final cadence, the last shaping of the riddle before it fades into silence. The instruments hum, their signals pulsing through ice as deep as mountains. Screens glow in dimly lit rooms, lines of data flickering like whispers, graphs trembling with faint irregularities. Outside, wind howls against steel, and the Antarctic night stretches unbroken, a darkness pierced only by auroras shimmering like veils of green fire. Beneath the surface, beyond the reach of eyes, machines register anomalies. Heat where there should be none, voids where solid ice was expected, reflections that suggest edges too sharp, too geometric, to be chance. Fact provides its foundation. Scientific surveys have confirmed subglacial lakes warmed by geothermal activity. Lake Vostok, buried beneath nearly 4 kilometers of ice, remains one of the largest bodies of liquid water on Earth, untouched for millions of years. Radar scans of Queen Maud Land have revealed mountains and hollows hidden beneath ice, their formations natural but striking, vast ranges invisible to the naked eye. Heat flows from volcanic ridges have created regions where ice thins unexpectedly, producing anomalies in temperature readings. These are documented, measured, studied. The record presents them as geology, remarkable but explicable. And yet quirky details persist. In some surveys, radar has returned echoes resembling angles, straight lines where none should exist. Scientists dismiss them as artifacts, errors of equipment, noise in the data. But in whispered circles, these echoes are presented as hints of structure, walls, chambers, forms too precise for nature. One anecdote tells of researchers whose instruments indicated regular intervals of reflection, as though beams had bounced not from chaotic rock, but from uniform surfaces. Their findings were never formally published, existing only in fragments of correspondence. A quirk of data, or a glimpse of something more? The debate takes center stage here. Myth against record in stark confrontation. The record insists Antarctica conceals wonders enough in its natural forms. Subglacial lakes, active volcanoes, hidden mountains, these alone suffice to explain anomalies. The myth counters the anomalies are too pointed, too recurring, too conveniently erased from official reports. Thermal maps show warmth concentrated in regions long linked to rumor. Radar echoes resemble structures, and the silence that follows them suggests suppression. Which interpretation carries weight, the sober restraint of science or the seductive pull of secrecy? Steel rests against console edges, cold and unyielding, while bells toll faintly from distant stations, their sound muffled by snow. Mist drifts across floodlit camps curling against domes and antennae. In this scene, men and women in heavy coats lean over data printouts, their faces illuminated by pale light, their voices hushed. Some point to irregularities, whispering interpretations, others shake their heads, insisting on error. Silence wins, for in official papers, the anomalies do not appear. But memory remains, carried in rumor, retold in late-night conversations, feeding the cycle of myth. Quirky reports surface in popular imagination. Satellite images showing hexagonal shadows dismissed as compression artifacts. Heat signatures suggesting vast caverns interpreted as geothermal vents. Photographs of snow ridges forming right angles, later explained as tricks of light. Each anomaly acquires a second life in rumor, stripped of context, amplified until it becomes part of the mythology of Antarctica. Even mistakes, once repeated, gain weight, their persistence itself a kind of evidence. Debate thrives in this environment. Scientists publish cautious papers, their words precise. Anomalous readings, uncertain data, further study required. Conspiracy theorists seize upon those phrases, interpreting caution as concealment. Meanwhile, skeptics within the academic world dismiss the entire conversation as fantasy, a projection of human longing onto a continent indifferent to myth. The polarization itself sustains the narrative. Silence on one side, speculation on the other, neither able to dispel the mist. The soundscape of this debate is haunting. Steel instruments hum, their signals echoing through ice. Bells toll faintly, announcing hours in lonely stations. Mist seeps through cracks, frosting against glass. Outside, auroras ripple across black skies, their movements slow, deliberate, hypnotic. Inside, data scrolls across monitors, rows of numbers with no drama, until one line shifts, one anomaly appears, one reading hints at something unexpected. Then silence, then erasure. Then the debate begins again. One particularly quirky anecdote involves a heat map leaked in the 1990s, showing a concentrated anomaly beneath Queen Maud Land. The official explanation, subglacial volcanic activity. Yet the map itself circulated in conspiracy circles as evidence of something hidden. Bases, ruins, perhaps technology preserved beneath ice. Its lines, colorful and vague, became iconic, appearing in countless retellings. That the anomaly had a natural explanation did not matter. The image carried power, its ambiguity irresistible. The debate around such images illustrates the heart of the matter. Nature provides wonders enough, volcanoes beneath glaciers, lakes sealed for millions of years, mountains invisible except through radar. Yet human imagination demands more. We see structure in noise, intent in coincidence, design in randomness. The record insists upon geology. The myth insists upon guardianship. Both are compelling and both feed the allure of Antarctica. Steel closes softly, instruments powered down, their hum fading into silence. Bells toll once more, resonant against the vast emptiness outside. Mist envelops the station, curling across antennae, erasing outlines until only shadows remain. The anomalies, whether noise or signal, remain in memory, unresolved. Some are explained, others are denied. Still others remain suspended, waiting for interpretation. Thus, myth and record meet but do not merge. The record offers geology. The myth offers secrecy. The truth remains obscured, preserved in the silence beneath ice. It is in this tension that fascination grows. The fragments collected across centuries, from maps, from rituals, from journals, from treaties, now converge here in the readings of instruments and the interpretations of their noise. The chain continues and the chest remains closed. The bells fade. Steel rests in quiet. Mist presses close against glass, obscuring the horizon. From contested anomalies and debated echoes, the story drifts now toward its final cadence. not resolution, but release, a wind down into silence, a slowing of rhythm, a descent into rest. Ahead lies the last movement, where motifs return, steel, bell, mist, and the fragments close into a circle, sealing the riddle as softly as it began. The bells toll faintly, not sharp as in battle or ceremony, but softened, distant, as though their sound drifts across centuries. Each note is stretched, echoing longer than it should, dissolving into the hush of mist that rolls endlessly across the Antarctic plain. Steel lies quiet now, no longer drawn in ritual or forged into fleets, but resting cold and still, forgotten tools buried under frost. Mist swirls low, covering every outline, smoothing every jagged edge until all becomes a soft blur of white and grey. The story itself seems to exhale, slowing its rhythm, folding its fragments into silence. We have followed the chain across ages. It began with gazelle skin parchment in an Ottoman library, Piri Reis stitching together coastlines from sources already lost in his day. It led into stone cloisters, where Templars guarded mysteries unspoken, their rituals heavy with symbol, their silence perhaps more eloquent than words. It flowed into navigators of Portugal, their sails marked with crimson crosses tilting subtly southward, into Freemasons with their compasses angled oddly, into Jesuits cataloguing manuscripts in distant lands. The chest was never opened, only carried forward, guarded by vows, guarded by silence. Then the sea took up the tale. Cook's ships pressing into fog, his official voice dismissive, his sailors' journals whispering of cliffs like walls and plumes of vapour. Bouvet citing his phantom island, naming it Cape Circumcision as if foretelling its erasure. Journals lost, pamphlets vanished, testimonies erased, patterns repeating, silence curated. The chest passed onward still. Steel engines of the 20th century broke the hush, roaring into mist. The Schwabenland flew its aircraft over Queen Maud Land, its photographs fragmentary, its legacy swollen with rumour. U-boats surrendered late in Argentina, feeding speculation of a hidden base beneath ice, a base 211 whispered into myth. Then Operation Highjump came like a hammer, 13 ships, 4,000 men, fleets descending upon the south, withdrawing too soon, leaving silence as their heaviest report. Bird's words, printed and mistranslated, fed more silence, more speculation, his voice echoing warnings no one could quite define. And at last, the Antarctic Treaty, signatures on parchment sealing a continent into consensus, forbidding not only war, but mining, forbidding even what could not yet be attempted, a chest closed with ink, silence preserved not by secrecy alone, but by law. Beneath it all, radar scans flickered, anomalies recorded, then explained, then debated, never fully dismissed. Angles beneath ice, warmth where none should be, echoes that resembled walls. The pattern repeated, anomaly, whisper, erasure. Steel, bell, mist. Across every age the motifs return. Steel, whether sword or compass, whether hull or engine, glinting briefly before resting in shadow. Bells, tolling from chapels, from ships, from distant stations, always marking the passage of time, but never breaking the silence fully. Mist, curling across harbours, cloisters, seas and plains, obscuring outlines, smoothing histories, preserving mystery by concealment. These motifs, recurring like refrains in music, remind us that history itself is less a line than a circle, a melody played over and over, slower each time until it fades into rest. Quirky fragments linger, even now. An emblem of an otter on polar crates, a sailor's note of cliffs cut like masonry. A pamphlet vanished, a map fragment hidden behind a palace wall. None alone is proof, yet each spark persists, refusing extinction. They drift in the mist like fireflies, glowing faintly, then vanishing, then glowing again. The debate will never end. Was it coincidence, error, illusion? Or was it guardianship, silence, deliberate concealment? The record insists upon geology, pragmatism, foresight. The myth insists upon secrecy, pattern, continuity. Between them lies the riddle, unsolved and unsolvable. And perhaps that is the truest legacy. Antarctica, bound in ice, refuses resolution. It yields fragments and takes them back. It allows glimpses, then covers them in mist. It offers silence as its most enduring answer. To chase its mysteries is to walk into fog, hearing bells that may or may not be there, touching steel that may be only memory, seeing outlines that dissolve as soon as they are named. The continent itself becomes the chest, locked, impenetrable, preserved by its own nature, as much as by treaties and secrecy. Steel rests quiet now, no longer an instrument of power, but a relic of effort. Bells toll faintly, then fade, their echoes stretch thin across white plains. Mist thickens, not ominous now, but soft, protective, a veil that comforts rather than conceals. The rhythm of the story slows, each sentence lengthening, breath deepening, until thought itself drifts toward rest. The chain of secrecy does not need solving, it needs only to be remembered as dream, as atmosphere, as lullaby. The continent remains vast and silent, its mysteries untouched beneath kilometers of ice. Perhaps beneath that weight lies nothing more than rock and water. Perhaps beneath it lies everything we have imagined, ruins, bases, maps of lost worlds. Either way, the effect is the same. Antarctica teaches us to live with silence, to accept the allure of unanswered questions. In its mist, we find not proof, but peace, the kind of peace that quiets the mind, that loosens the grip of thought, that carries one towards sleep. Steel glints one last time, faint as starlight through fog. Bells toll softly, their notes dissolving into distance. Mist closes gently, folding the fragments into darkness, into silence. The chest is sealed, not with locks or chains, but with snow, with time, with forgetfulness, and in that sealing the riddle rests. Now the story itself slows to a whisper. Words stretch, soften, fade. The rhythm lulls, steady as breath, calm as the pulse of the earth beneath ice. The bells are gone, the steel is still. The mist holds everything in quiet embrace. Sleep comes like snow falling gently, endlessly, covering every surface in white silence. May your night be long, your dreams deep, your rest unbroken beneath the veil of mist.